All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Trent Tinker. I lead the federal team here at Cesium. Thank you for joining us. You are in the aerospace and defense track here, so just making sure you're in the right location. And I'd like to welcome Ron Moore from Maxar for our first presentation.
Confirm the mic is on. Excellent. Hey, I'm Ron Moore. I work for Maxar on the One World Train program. I have listed a couple of other folks who helped me with the slides. I was actually hoping one of those would be presenting, but they are not, so I'm doing it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about our relationship with, that is One World Train's relationship with Cesium, sort of talk about what One World Train is, and talk about a little bit of our process, and that's just really to introduce you to what we do. I'm going to spend some time talking about the well-formed format, which you should all think of as 3D tiles. And I'm going to talk about what we've done recently on that. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about some of the strength, weaknesses, our usage, a little bit of experience on that, and then show you some examples of that data set. In 2019, the Army selected 3D tiles as the well-formed format, hence where the name came from. Well-formed format for the STE, the synthetic training environment. Since then, we've worked with Cesium. They've been a partner with us on all of the development. They were party to all of our help extending 3D tiles to do the things that we're doing for the One World Train program. 3D tiles is our internal format for our whole processing pipe. We redid the whole thing to be based on 3D tiles. We've realized that that is our delivery format now for all of our content for STE. We've supported Cesium in the release of 3D tiles 1.1 through OGC. We've been a big supporter of the open source. We use it in all of our, many of our tools in terms of Cesium JS, Cesium Native, the validation suite. So we really are a long-term commitment to 3D tiles. It is a great format for us. So what is the One World Train program? Well, first, what is the STE program? Synthetic Training Environment. It's the U.S. Army's activities to update their collective training systems. The One World Train program is the geospatial part of that activity, and it's really building a system to produce the data and populate the world. And that's what we're working on, and the key foundational piece of that is a common data format, which we refer to as the well-formed format, which all of you should say 3D tiles. We've done some additions to that that are probably a little unique in our domain. We've added things like vector data to 3D tiles. It fits in the LOD scheme, it fits in the tiling scheme. We've chosen to use a US Army-sponsored, NGA-originated data model for our way of describing all of our data. And of course, we've chosen a tiling scheme that leverages the power of 3D tiles, but applies a very consistent tiling scheme for the world called S2 geometry. In terms of the process, I drew a simple diagram here. This is just to get you introduced to the idea of when we talk about the One World Trade program, sort of what is the foundational view of how we process data. It is we start with imagery from satellites, a globally available data set that allows us to be able to represent any place in the world. We run it through a very traditional process called photogrammetry. We call it 3D reconstruction. And it really is the idea that we can take those photos from satellites and process them to produce a 3D surface model of the Earth anywhere. This is just, I call this 3D photo because it's just geometry that is surface with textures on it. But it does a great place of starting place for producing the world. I will mention that we use both Maxar Precision 3D data, that is a 3D photogrammetrically derived surface model, as well as we've been working with NGA on their Real 3D from the Geodata Cooperative, again, produced as a 3D surface model. We run that through a process we call authoritative extraction. I like to tell everyone it's basically taking this picture and giving it meaning. We use AI and image processing to create a terrain model, extract the buildings and turn them into separate geometries, classify every pixel into land cover. Those kind of things are done in that authoritative extraction. I use authoritative because it's what a traditional analyst would do in terms of extracting information from a photograph. We then run it through a process which we refer to as synthetic refinement. For you guys in training, it's making up data that fill the gaps that you don't get when you get source data, filling the gaps to make something that is usable for training. You see here we've replaced those photogrammetry buildings that have been extracted into something that actually has really nice textures with doors and windows and all the things you'd expect for modeling and simulation guys to want when they want to go inside a building. And the last thing we do, of course, is format that for runtime. This is an example of runtime. It's a VBS runtime, but it takes that same process. Now, what I want to highlight is everything in dark blue is actually fully automated, and we just sort of pour the data in, and the output process produces this data. Sort of taking that for a second and just saying that diagram, if you look, the yellow well-formed format, that's everywhere we have implemented 3D tiles as our standard for our data. That includes the whole processing pipe as well as all the inputs are actually formatted into well-formed format, i.e. 3D tiles before we use it. And it just represents the fact that we have adopted 3D tiles as sort of the basis for all of our activities in the One World Train production process. So I was actually noting in Patrick's presentation this morning, he mentioned the conference last week. It was, last year, and it was a day from now that we actually presented last year's what we did with well-formed format. So this is what do we do this year? We released well-formed format 1.8, which you should again say that's 3D tiles with some clarity about how we use it, plus the extensions. The Army has allowed us to publish this as a public document, so if any of you want to learn about what we did, or you want to learn about the spec, it's publicly available. If anybody needs a pointer to that, stop me afterwards, give me your card, I'll send you the links. But you can see what it's basically composed of. It really represents our tailoring of the well-formed, of 3D tiles to produce the well-formed format. So what's new this year from last year? Almost nothing. The truth is we've really reached a pretty sort of equilibrium state in terms of our standard. We've added a few clarity, added a little bit more information, and adopted another compression, but really not much changed from last year in terms of the standard itself. A few observations. I want to just point these out. Is we added some new things, some different things to 3D tiles that we really felt necessary for the modeling and sim community. We did a packaging mechanism where we can sort of package it into an archive that allows us to have a lot less files. When you're talking about the world, a lot less files matter. We added vector data, as I mentioned. Again, needing more information than simply what's visual. It's really key to us. We needed some additional information to describe areas. We've added that. One of the things we wanted to be able to do is pull out ortho images directly, as opposed to always having to go to textures. We've added that. We added a bunch of metadata. Metadata has been our mantra. We've added a lot of metadata to all of the forms of the data. And last, we've worked with NGA on the GPM. It's a way of encoding predicted accuracy. Strengths and weaknesses, I don't want you guys to think that it's all perfect, but there are some wonderful strengths. It's basically 2D and 3D of the world, streaming in file format. It is actually very efficient in size when compared to the equivalent data in other formats, which I referred to as the well-known formats. So if you haven't ever done a comparison, it's worth doing because it really is an efficient way of describing data. The thing we like is it's a single mechanism for organizing all of your data geospatially. Rich metadata, I've already said that once. And it's a community standard, which of course is great. There are a few weaknesses. I'll sort of say, yeah, there's a few things that they left out of 1.1 that they had in 1.0. Wouldn't mind putting that back. It wouldn't be bad if we had a way of doing some binary formats for the metadata, because it's not bad if you're not spending too much time populating metadata. We put a lot of metadata. That'd be one area we could do some improvements. And the last is one that you should all engage in, and that is the calculation of geometric error, which I wish we had a little more consistency on. If you've ever used multiple producers' data sets, you could realize that you almost have to have a bias that you can put into that. So Trent, that would be one you could work on. All right, challenges. Now, the challenges here are really more about really understanding how we took 3D tiles and we use it in this domain, and some of the challenges using it in the modeling and sim community. One is, I wish we had a way to edit it. Still on my list from last year. Second is compromises or decisions we've had to make about how we store data in 3D tiles to make it useful for all of our applications. And I'm not going to spend too much time other than saying the tiling scheme and the LOD scheme, they tend to be very runtime centric for the consumer, and so finding that balance of how much we put in 3D tiles and how much optimization we put in versus how much we sort of prepare for its other consumption has been a bit of a challenge. I'd love to talk more about that if you're really interested. And the last is knowing how much unique content to put in to enable the runtime activities. And those are just balanced things you have to figure out. What that really meant to us is we've sort of compromised the direct use of 3D tiles for visualization against making it a more transmittal format. So we sort of tried to find that balance between the two. That's probably been one of the most unique challenges of all, is sort of knowing that right place to pick the right abstraction of the data. Samples. So I wish we could talk a lot more. 6 years of work in 20 minutes is really hard to talk about, but let me just show you. We've leveraged 3D tiles as part of Maxar to produce the world. This is actually a 3D surface model of the world. This is streaming, recorded directly off a machine sitting there, streaming from a server. It really is 3D at 50 centimeter elevation, 50 centimeter texture, and will, of course, end in the right place. The goal is, it's wonderful to have a system that can store that level of information of the world and have it seamless. The second is an example of the ability to store lots of additional data. This is an example of a 3D surface model with a secondary and tertiary, actually multiple textures applied so that at LOD schemes you can slip in other alternative forms of the data, like a picture of a map. I mentioned this earlier, the GPM. We worked with NGA to produce a standard. Most of the folks if you work with GPM, you realize it's always been a sidecar file, a secondary file that went along with your primary file that's described all this. With 3D tiles, we were able to use the extensions and directly include this per pixel error as part of the data itself, not some secondary data set. So we're able to encode per pixel error and all of the anchor points for the predicted accuracy. And last, I just want to highlight the fact, I said this before, rich metadata. The One World Train program, the positional accuracy of our data is 3 meters CE and LE 90. And in that data, we have all of the forms that you'd expect, not just for the visualization, but for the reasoning. That's why we have land classification, we have all the vector data, roads, rivers, trees, every tree if you want it in the world, all 3 trillion, I think. The idea is that within a single organization, that is 3D tiles, we can store all this data and have it correlated and consistent. That's my short talk. I will say 3 takeaways. One is the US Army paid for the data on One Train. It's available through that PEO Strike contracting office. So if you're really interested, let me know and I'll put you in contact with them. Second is the well-form format spec is out there and you're welcome to get access to it. And third is if you have similar kind of interests and you've done something similar or would like to talk about what you've done in this area, I'd love to talk about it, especially in the area of vectors and maps, because they're still challenging and we'd love to have other inputs into that. And that's my talk.